chemical sensitivity is mast cell activation.
Mast cell activation, of course. Wait, pause. Why do you think this is not taught in medical school?
Well, I mean, I think if we fast forward.
Welcome to this week's episode of the Medical Disruptor, where I introduce you to clinicians and providers and concepts that disrupt medicine. I'm Dr. E, the NP with a PhD and self-acclaimed medical disruptor. And today's guest is Dr. McCann. You know you have a great guest when the episode leaves you with questioning your purpose and your calling in life. And maybe I ended up with some tears at the end. Maybe. You'll have to find out. Dr. McCann will talk to us today about MCAS, Mast Cell Activation Syndrome. But then she takes it a step further as to why your body is so activated to begin with. This episode is equal parts science and equal parts woo-woo. So get ready for the ride. Dr. McCann, Kelly, I am so excited that you're here today. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me, E.
Of course. So you know that the Medical Disruptor, we're going to ask you why you decided to become a Medical Disruptor in a moment. But I want our audience to kind of know where we're going because I like to tease them right from the start. So what is it that we're going to end up talking about, but we're not going to start talking about yet? What are we going to talk about today?
We're probably going to talk about mast cell activation syndrome, which is very hot. It's a great topic. And that's also because it's becoming more and more prevalent. So we need to talk about mast cell activation. And then one of my favorite things to talk about is actually spiritual psychology. And what I mean by that is the relationship between our soul, our being, and our bodies, and how they communicate, and how when we're on a health journey, it's possible that the symptoms that our bodies are expressing are the means through which our beings or our souls are communicating to us.
Ooh, I cannot wait to dive in. So I'm going to call this like MCAS with a twist.
I think that sounds good.
With a twist of some spirituality, because they're all connected. And anyone who's listening to this knows that I discovered that much later on, that piece, right? Like you start, I know I'm getting ahead of myself. You start and you think about the algorithm. If I do this and I move this lever, and if I put this supplement, then I do this test. Then after a while, you're like, none of this would work if we don't work on the spiritual piece. But before we get there, tell us how you started off, because you have a very impressive educational resume. So tell us how you started off and, you know, the initial brainwashing before you got unbrainwashed. I know I shouldn't say that, but it's true. Okay.
Well, I didn't have a lot of brainwashing. I will say that.
Oh,
because
okay.
I went into medicine with my eyes much more wide open, but I get ahead of myself too. I had no intention of becoming a physician when I was younger. I was a singer. I studied voice at Brown University. I had a vocal teacher at New England Conservatory of Medicine. Like, that was my life. And then sometime around my junior year of college, I thought, I don't know if I really want to do this.
Wow.
You know, become an opera singer, like something's missing. Something's missing. So I sang in a rock band my senior year, and I graduated and I had no idea what to do. And there were no jobs for people with bachelors of arts in music who didn't want to go into music. So my mom suggested that I go to library science school, get a master's in library science. I could like have a skill because she's a librarian, right?
Oh, okay. I love that.
So I moved back home. I went to the University of Albany, got a master's in library science. Took me about a year and a half, and I thought, the only thing I really like is thinking about the mind and the brain and how it organizes information, and maybe I'll go do neuroscience and I'll get a PhD in neuroscience. But then I would have had to go back to undergrad and do like 3 more years to get all the science requirements. And okay, I'm not going to do that. But I can go to medical school in like a little bit less. So I decided I was going to go to medical school.
I love that.
And then somewhere along,
I went to med school because it was less school than the thing I wanted. I don't think I've ever heard that statement. So,
yeah,
okay.
I don't think I thought that through, but that's what I was thinking at the time. And then somewhere around there, I started going to this meditation class, and it was being taught by an acupuncturist. And I read a book by Dan Millman, the name of which is escaping me right now. But all of these things were pointing me in the direction like I needed to do something more holistic. And I was in awe of my acupuncturist lecturer, meditation teacher. And I thought, oh, I'll go to acupuncture school. And my parents were like, how about this? You know, I think you should go to medical school. And so I said, okay, if I'll apply to all sorts of medical schools, and if I don't get in, I'll go to acupuncture school. And I was pretty psyched about that because I was like, yeah, who cares, right?
This is great. The accidental doctor.
I know, totally. I got into 4 medical schools.
Of course you did. God damn it.
Gosh, I gotta go. So I chose Tulane because I wanted to get as far away from upstate New York as possible. No offense.
None taken.
And then I will say my first year of medical school was just torturous. I was not very happy at all, pretty depressed. I think my boyfriend at the time really didn't want to commit to me because he wasn't sure that I was actually going to stay.
Oh.
So I was a
Where
little,
are you now, boyfriend? Just kidding.
um,
We don't want to know.
yeah, yeah, somewhere married to someone else. I'm sure he's
I was
very.
just trying to make it juicy.
And then I kind of got into it. I got a master's in public health also, along with
Of
my
course. Why
medical
not?
degree.
Again, less schooling than neuro. Got it. Great.
Yeah, I was a bargain shopper. Get 2 degrees for 4 years. So let me have it. And I kind of did the same thing with residency. I did a med peds residency. So that's essentially 2 residencies in internal medicine and pediatrics
Yes, of course.
in 4
2
years.
for 1 special. Once again, the
2
bargain.
special. My grandmother taught me well, right? She was
Just it.
consummate bargain shopper. So, and when I graduated, well, throughout my medical school and residency, I tried as much as I could to learn about holistic alternative medicine. I remember going to different conferences about mind body medicine with Herbert Benson, who wrote the book The Stress Response. So this was, in the early days before it was functional medicine. Started a little student group. I took a bunch of public health classes. I studied with an acupuncturist, like all this stuff to try and be as alternative as possible. And, same thing through medical school. I had an acupuncturist mentor that I was working with. And then thank God I finally graduated from residency. I was like, okay, I get to do what I want to do now. Finally,
wait.
stop.
Wait, before you tell me what you want to do, which I'm super excited, I have to just ask you this because it's just coming to my mind. So like you're studying and I have this speech that I give about medical gaslighting. And in it, I propose that it's not so much medical gaslighting as much as it is indoctrination from med school, where we learn that there's only one way, evidence-based medicine, and any other way is quackery, right? This just doesn't exist. And so, and the point is to not vilify doctors, to let them know, to let people know it's really just indoctrination. So how do you go to school, hear the indoctrination, because it's embedded in the schooling, everything else, everything alternative, just the word alternative already says less than. And at the same time studying alternative, and did you ever feel while you were in school, like I can't wait to jump in to hear what you did when you graduated, but did you ever feel in school that there was a push and pull?
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, I
Mm.
think that I always had my heart set on being as holistic as possible. And I don't think I really knew what that looked like, but I knew what that felt like.
Ooh, I
And,
love that.
and I was not, I mean, that's kind of why I was not happy through much of medical school. It's like, this really is
Prescriptive and
painful. And, we're taking care of people. And I'm in New Orleans, and, the choices and the education level about many of the people who are there, especially when we're, medical students and I got a fantastic education in
sure.
the spectrum of disease, right?
There you go.
And the sorrow and the, just the challenges of life. But I always knew that I wanted to do something different. I always knew that there was something different out there. Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so you graduate.
So I graduate.
What do you do?
I got a job in Oregon, actually, in a little town outside of Corvallis. Like Corvallis is not a very big place. I'm outside of Corvallis, like a little farm
Smaller.
town, Lebanon. And the other doctors, it was a family practice group. The other doctors were amazing, just wonderful people. Rich Evans, who was one of my partners in that clinic, was also a medical acupuncturist. He had done
Mm.
the Helms medical acupuncture course. I signed up immediately for the Helms acupuncture course. And I applied for the University of Arizona's program in integrative medicine.
More schooling?
More schooling. Yeah. Yeah. I don't, yeah. I take your point. I take your point. I didn't want to go back to undergrad. I wanted to move forward,
Yes,
right?
God.
It wasn't the school. It was
I'm not going back. I'm only moving forward. I love
I'm
that.
only moving forward. So yes, I signed up, I applied, and I got in to the in-person residency program fellowship with the University of Arizona. But I was still in Oregon. I was going to have to be there for, 2 years before the program started, something like that. So I'm seeing patients in the hospital because that's how the practice is. It's one of those little like rural practices. So we have clinic, we have hospital rounds that we're responsible for. I'm trying to learn acupuncture, and I start having insomnia.
Wow.
And I start getting muscle aches and pains, and I think I'm developing fibromyalgia. I start developing terrible fatigue. Obviously, I get depressed. So now I'm, in a state where it's raining all the
Oh,
time.
goodness.
And I'm all alone in this little town, and, dating in Corvallis was not
It was
a lot
not
of
it. It
fun.
was not it.
It was not it. Yeah. Either you're in college or you're married. So it was tough. It's definitely tough. And I think hindsight, my office was moldy.
Ooh,
I had
yes.
no
Makes
idea.
so much sense.
So much sense. It was a flat roof building. It was built in like the 50s. It was absolutely moldy.
Of course it was
Um,
moldy, and it's always raining there.
yeah, it was tough. I remember sometimes I would have a massage therapist come in and give me a massage at lunch because I was so exhausted and so uncomfortable.
Wow.
And at one point, I knew I needed to get out. I could not stay there. I was also working in an integrative medicine clinic too. So that was like the highlight of my time there. But for the most part, it was tough. So I get an offer from my acupuncture mentor who was at the Helms course. He had to leave the country, had to practice in DC, and said, "Hey, come take over my practice for the year, and then you'll be able to go to the fellowship." So I packed up all my stuff and moved to DC. And then, unfortunately, his opportunity didn't manifest. And so I had to figure out what to do. So I got a locums job in Idaho because I had met a boy, and I
Boy from
followed him to
Idaho.
Idaho. Long story short, I eventually end up in Tucson. Things don't work out with the boy. I do the fellowship, and I graduate, and then I decide to open a practice in Southern California because I've always wanted to be in Southern California. So here I am 15 years later with a functional medicine practice called the Spring Center in Orange County, California.
Amazing story. I love the story. So now at this point, you open up this practice, you're feeling better.
Yes, my time in Tucson was magical. I just flourished. I did yoga
Sure. And you also left the moldy building.
and I left the mold.
And luckily you had the wherewithal, like physically, to detoxify from, as opposed to carrying with you. Because
I
some
had
people,
no idea,
yeah,
actually.
no, you had no idea. Yeah. Yeah. I get it.
My body knew what to do. I
Yeah.
didn't yet.
So, because I want to go back to that. So you open up this practice and with functional medicine, And so your story is basically, I was never really a disruptor. I never drank the Kool-Aid to begin with. I didn't have to unlearn it. I always, from the beginning, took the tools that I needed, integrated on my own, which I love. That's such a great path. Many of us had to learn it the hard way, like realize that everything, not everything we learn, but like what we learn starts from disease on right now, pre-disease.
Right.
Okay, so you have this practice. Now, when do you start delving in MCAS? Like, when does that start to hit you? Is it because you're getting patients? Like, for me, it was like my patients were getting sicker and sicker. The better you get at it, the sicker the patients are that come to you.
Right.
You start getting more complicated patients. And then eventually I was like, what's going on here? And that's how I stumbled on MCAS. How about you? How did that happen for you?
So I started the practice. I did the Institute for Functional Medicine training. While I had been in Arizona, I connected with Lynn Patrick, who's a naturopathic doctor who studied under Walter Crinion, who taught environmental medicine. Sadly, Dr. Crinion is no longer with us, but Dr. Patrick had said, you got to study with Walter. So I studied with Walter. I studied environmental medicine.
More schooling, by the way.
He did a fellowship, more school.
I'm sorry. It's like the theme. I can't let it go.
It's true. It's true. So more school. It was a fellowship with Dr. Walter Crinion through the American College for the Advancement of Medicine, ACAM. That was a year-long course. One of my classmates in that course said, "Hey, Kelly, I know you've got the HLA DQ D2,
D2,
whatever.
D2.
So the celiac genes, because we had talked about it, he's like, you need to check out Richie Shoemaker and learn about mold." Okay, noted. So I think this was probably 2014, or maybe earlier than that. So I start studying Richie Shoemaker's work. I start implementing it in my practice.
But by the way, for our audience, anyone listening, Richie Shoemaker is like the godfather of mold. And I take my mentorship from Neil Nathan, who studied with Richie Shoemaker. So
Right.
we have to pass this on this way because it's not taught in traditional medicine. So yeah.
Absolutely not taught. Interesting thing is, really, the true grandfather of mold is Bill Ray. Bill Ray was a cardiothoracic surgeon in Texas who opened the Environmental Health Center of Dallas. And he wrote several articles about mold patients long before Shoemaker did.
Fascinating. I didn't know that. Thank you for edifying that.
Yeah, you're welcome. So we got to tip our hats to him. He wrote a 4-book series of chemical sensitivity.
Wow. Okay.
4 books. These are huge tomes. Chemical sensitivity is mast cell activation.
Mast cell activation, of course. Wait, pause. Why do you think this is not taught in medical school?
Well, I mean, I think if we fast forward and talk about Lawrence Afrin, and so he's my teacher in mast cell activation this time around, right?
More schooling.
Schooling.
But that's how it is. You can't do this without going to more and more.
So I think it's just like chronic Lyme, right? There are 2 schools of thought. There's the school that chronic Lyme doesn't exist. It's a bacterial infection. You give a couple weeks of doxycycline and you're good.
You're done.
Versus the ILADS, International Society for Lyme and Associated Diseases. Anyway,
it's okay. ILADS. It's okay. They could look it up.
They can look it up. Who recognize that you can have persistent infections.
You're so kind in like your explanations, because I get like I'm an activist. I'm like, why don't they teach it? And you're like, well, it's just 2 schools of thought. Now, it's 2 schools of thought for you in that you're respectful for the other school of thought. But the people in the other school of thought are not respectful for this school of thought. They say, no, there's no such thing as chronic Lyme. There's no such thing as mold disease. Okay, I'm not going to turn you into an activist.
They drank the Kool-Aid.
We drank the Kool-Aid. We did not drink the Kool-Aid.
I can see,
You can see both sides. And that's, it's so funny. It's always a tell. If the person you talk to is respectful to the other side, you're probably on the right side.
I think so too.
Okay, so you learn you start learning about mold. And then how do you get to, well, you can't really learn mold without MCAS, but you know what? Why don't you tell our
Well,
audience first?
actually, when I first started doing mold, nobody was talking about MCS, right?
Right.
It wasn't talked about. And then I realized, oh, I have to learn about Lyme. So then I started, my times must have been off because I think my first ILADS conference was like 2013 in
That's
San Diego.
okay. Don't worry about the times.
Anyway, so I learned about Lyme. And then I'm doing mold, I'm doing Lyme. People are getting sicker. People are getting,
Sicker,
so
just
sick.
sicker.
And they're really hard to manage. You know, cue in Larry Afrin to the stage, and it just blows my mind. I'm like, okay, yes, absolutely. This is the way that we have to treat. And I start seeing lots and lots of MCAS patients. I start recognizing MCAS in some
Yeah, that's the thing. You start
my
recognizing it.
previous patients. I'm like, oh, you have MCAS too.
You have
Like,
MCAS.
you probably did as well, right? But mold and Lyme drive MCAS,
Right,
environmental
right.
toxicants drive MCAS. So everything that I learned up to that point was absolutely supportive for these people because you had to look for the root cause too, right?
And I want to make sure that our audience is following us, because this is, like you said it so well, but I want people to follow, because there's an evolution as a provider as well, right? Especially because anyone listening and saying, why does my provider know this? If you're in functional medicine, right? We don't learn this in school. So we have to have this natural curiosity to constantly go for more certifications and more studying. And so you kind of start off with that, like functional medicine 101, let's fix the belly, let's fix the gut, let's get all these things, which is very important. Let's like,
Super important.
and then a lot of your patients get better and you're like, great, I'm an awesome provider. And then some of your patients don't get well. So you start digging deeper, and then you discover mold. Like, oh, this is why so-and-so didn't get better when I fixed their nutrition, because they had a mold or Lyme. So then you got to get better here. And you're like, great, I'm an excellent provider. And then you get these patients who still don't do well with your mold treatment and your Lyme treatment.
I don't
And
think
so
you
then,
solved it at all.
and then you discover MCIS and multiple chemical sensitivity. And I'm going to ask you to define for us in a moment what MCAS is. So then you start getting better in that. And that's going to lead us also to this next piece, which is a psychological piece. But the evolution of a provider over time, like, as patients, sometimes we want the providers to know everything, but you might meet a provider at their early stage of learning as well. And they're doing a lot of good things. No, you can't harm people by telling them to start eating fruits and
Healthy.
vegetables instead of
Right.
McDonald's. But there is an evolution. And I think where you are now, which we didn't get to yet, is, well, I don't know. I'm going to say it's the penultimate, or the ultimate, but maybe it's the penultimate. So we'll discover if we're missing a piece of it. Okay, so MCAS. So we're here now. We're here at MCAS land. And it's funny because, yes, the patients get sicker because it almost like everyone starts to get to know that you're the person for the people that no one else can manage. Tell our audience what MCAS is.
So MCAS stands for Mast Cell Activation Syndrome. Mast cells are blood cells. They're born in the bone marrow. They're related to our red and our white blood cells. Their job is to move from the bone marrow to what I call the areas of interface between ourselves and the outside world. So they line our upper respiratory tracts, they're in our mouth, entire GI tract. They have a high affinity for our nerves and our blood vessels. They hang around there. And their job is to constantly surveil the body for foreign invaders. So if they perceive a foreign invader like COVID, like an infection, like Lyme, mycotoxin, fungi, you name it, they are filled with these chemical messengers called mediators. And what they do is they dump their mediators to sound the alarm to the rest of the body and the rest of the immune system. Hey, there's a foreign invader. I just dumped all my inflammatory mediators and we need help. Bring all the troops, right? And so then what happens is people have an inflammatory response. This happens in everyone. This is a normal part of how the immune system functions. This is what we call the innate immune system. Many other mammals besides humans have mast cells. The problem comes with the activation piece. So when people are being either constantly exposed to triggers that cause the mast cells to release their mediators, otherwise known as degranulation, then you start to have symptoms all the time. And those symptoms are often allergic,
Mm.
inflammatory, or one of the third things that happens is the mast cells can produce growth factors. So people can develop lots of cysts, like lipomas, and kind of cysts in a variety of different places. That's less common, but one of the characteristics of mast cell activation. So that's what mast cell is.
So it's your immune system, which is doing a great job at recognizing foreign invaders, but it's
Yes.
always on.
Yeah.
And then it's, it's part of it is it's always on because you may still be around your triggers and you haven't, but if not mistaken, sometimes it's just kind of, even when you remove the triggers, it has to learn to deactivate. It's now on high alert regardless. So sometimes you remove the mold, the urine's coming out great and the patient's still symptomatic, right? That's part of the
Absolutely.
trick.
That is
Yeah.
part of the trick. And that's where it's not just about the immune system, it's about the nervous system. So I like this three-legged stool approach where you have to address the immune system, that's your mast cells. You also have to address your autonomic nervous system, that's one of
Mm.
the legs of the stool, and then the limbic system, which is the part of the brain that takes our experiences and turns them into memories. And so people often who have mast cell activation also will be limbically activated. So their nervous system is in a heightened state of alert. And in the autonomic nervous system side, we call that's the biggest nerve where we're stuck in fight, flight, or freeze.
Yes. And I just want to say back to what I was saying earlier about that kind of evolution of the provider. So, we had the functional, then we had the Lyme and the mold and the MCAS, and, you try to treat it and, you give the Singulair or the ketoprofen and try to calm down the mast cell activations along with the mold toxicity. But those two pieces, to me, that I learned that much later on, and it sounds like for you as well, y- this is far beyond just a mold detox or taking supplements. If you don't fix this nervous system, in fact, Dr. Nathan says, don't even bother starting with a protocol until you fix this part. I'm sure you feel the same. So if your nervous system is stuck on sick, is stuck on active, it doesn't matter what we give you. So how do you like to retrain the brain? Ooh, cliffhanger. How do you retrain the brain? Well, to find out, you're going to have to watch the part 2 because this was so good. It requires its own episode. Thank you for tuning into the Medical Disruptor. If today's conversation resonated with you and you're ready to dig deeper, you can start with my book or my free courses. They're on my website, drefratlamondre.com. If you're interested in working with me one-on-one, please apply to my waiting list. If you're an NP looking for courses to level up your clinical competence, visit my other website at egprep.com. Don't forget to subscribe, share this podcast, and leave a review. It helps us reach more disruptors like you. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep disrupting.